the strength with which he is supposed to argue will depend on the weight that you put in the pocket, down pocket. So it's very enough. So let's see how where we be. All right. We have one other. So when I was told the topic, I thought I had a whole day. Then I realized I have 1 hour. So that's a bit of a challenge. What I'm going to do is really focus on specific 5 areas which seem to be the high level items when you look at any merger or acquisition. Typical issues first emerge from the commercial expectation or the commercial. So whether it's a deal structure, whether you want to take the consideration of equity, whether you want to take the cash, whether you want to look at some other consideration for the transaction. It can also have some impact on the perspective how parties look at a transaction. As you can typically see, the same transaction can be viewed as a merger or an acquisition. So you please decipher for yourself whether the transaction is a merger or acquisition. A lot will depend on how you perceive it. A lot will also depend on how you want to negotiate it. There are, of course, the mergers and acquisitions are meant for organic, inorganic growth rather than organic. Now, this is of course not the legal way of doing it, but growth in business can be also through mergers and acquisitions. So, if I were to look at who really can get into a M&A transaction, it's completely agnostic to your business organization. You may have a contract, you may have a partnership, you may have a LLP, you can have a EOP, BOI, whatever business structure you have. It does not mean M&A activity really goes on in a spectrum of only companies, listed companies, transnational transactions. It's clearly not the case. M&A activity happens at all levels. So even when one proprietor is trying to close his business and sell it off to somebody else, that's also a M&A transaction and probably involves equally complex processes and costs associated with that. So just one fundamental thing to remember that M&A is not necessarily only companies and large organizations. It can happen at all levels. So if I were to look at different types of laws that can apply, so let me just think about first companies, since we have very limited time today. Let's focus on companies, whether they are private, public, listed. What kind of transactions really qualify as transaction structure? It could be purchase of assets, it could be purchase of business, like I was saying. We will see some of the statutory impact of that. It could be share purchase, it could be share exchange, it could be acquisition of by a takeover in a listed company. It can have a pre-approval, it can have an integration, it can have a consequence of you compared to acquire further shares. You can also treat joint ventures as these M&A kind of transactions, and which of course has a very different type of a challenge when it comes to joint ventures. I had dealt with that partially in the earlier session by the chamber and the negotiation of contracts. But that is something which I would seriously recommend that only joint ventures is something which you can have a full day session on. There are a lot of complex issues other than just M&A. There's one segment of M&A that is joint ventures. Really with the full day or probably a little more than that to discuss. Private equity investments. Typically private equity investors, if you have seen the documents, they have a very peculiar mindset. The mindset is that they want all the upside of equity, but more than 4 times the assurance of a secured credit. The reason being they are really not betting on your past, but they are betting on your future possible performance. You do not necessarily have a great history to demonstrate what you can do. You have only abilities to demonstrate to the world. So, the reason why private equity investors behave in a particular way, there is clearly a rationale. If you just juxtapose IPOs versus PE investments, IPOs clearly will come with a pre-warning that past performance is not indicative of future. But here in case of PE, there is not even a past performance available to you for any justification. So when it comes to all kinds of these transaction structures, obviously you will need lawyers, and this is a very common experience when you look at any legal document. That they are very simple. Where lawyers are extremely coordinated in their drafting, and they come up with some fantastic structures. And what are they known for? Dilly-dally delay stall. The commercial lawyers practice over a period of time obviously has seen and have been very fortunate to see the transition from the dilly-dally delay stall model to a model where the clients will come to you, and I'm sure all the corporates have done that to their advisors day in, day out. That you come to the advisor and say, I am at point A, point B is my destination. Please make sure I reach there and none of my directors are behind the bar. So right from, it's almost like a turnkey project, right from concept to execution, the clients tend to rely on your acumen and your ability to read into their business. You need to think the way the client thinks. It's like a stepping position for an advisor, and that's really challenging. That you are not merely in a legal domain, but it's a very mix of economic domain, commercial domain, legal domain, and structuring. Obviously, every transaction has a tax element to it, so you need to take care of that. Obviously, the lawyers of either side will need to weigh that, balance that against each other's interest, and then take it forward. So, luckily, this model that you see on the screen is no more prevalent, at least as far as the commercial law is concerned. So, we are thankfully moved far away from there. Having said that, you need to start any transaction with look before you leave attitude, and I am not talking of your advisors. So, they are not the ones who are, you should be really scared of, but it is a transaction. So what is it that you will do as a first essential activity to commencing a transaction is a due diligence. So there are multiple types of due diligence that you need to do. So before we get into the due diligence, let me just illustrate what kind of mix of laws that today apply. So that's one of the other themes that I want to talk about. That apart from just the commercial aspects and the prospective view, it is a mix of laws which make it very interesting, cumbersome, complicated, challenging, and sometimes even requires you to change the legal structures. So what are the mix of law that we are really talking about? Companies Act, of course, Companies Act has a lot of now new processes, new requirements, new challenges on governance and so on. Then if you are dealing with SEBI, listed company, in a listed company, apart from your normal listing agreement or LODR agreement, which are more about the compliance and disclosure, you also have corporate governance requirements. You also need to look at the takeover code. You also need to look at prevention of insider trading. You need to look at all kinds of due diligence aspects that will hit the board. Now, when we talk about the board, which board are we talking about? It's both the boards, the acquirer as well as the target. So we will see some of the challenges that both the boards face. So type of due diligence that you really conduct in any of the major transactions is legal and secretarial. So it's financial or accounting, technical, IPR, commercial or market intelligence. You will do HR, you will also do strategy, tax, direct and indirect, environment, competition law, insurance and risk management. And the last one, which we sometimes tend to forget, that it's very nice to read the numbers of 5,000 crore transactions, 4,000 crore transactions, 500 crore transactions. It's very nice to look at numbers. What we tend to always forget that these numbers do not emanate from spreadsheets. They are made by people. I mean, any M&A transaction, one of the biggest challenges is that how are you going to retain a duplicate of your, like your own clone, when you are adding one more organization to yourself? Surely there will be some heads which will have the role. Are we ready for that challenge? One, as a legal structure, as a legal compliance. Second, it hasn't even been considered that what kind of HR issues that can come up in completing the transaction. So that is one element which unfortunately in most of the cases, and if you see the tracking of the success of M&A activity, the biggest mergers have failed on cultural issues and not on financial issues. So this is one aspect which it is unfortunate, but we tend to forget the human element of the transaction. And the human element, of course, can also be seen from attitudes like this, that clearly acquisition is acquisition, merger is different. Very broadly, the transaction process starts with some kind of a hazy concept that whether you want to do a transaction of a share purchase, a business purchase, an asset purchase, whatever you want to do. Then you will come up with a term sheet which is usually non-guided. You will conduct a due diligence. Based on the due diligence, you will identify conditions precedent, what are the essential things to be done at closing, how you will complete the transaction, and what will you do post-transaction. So all that will become part of your documentation and negotiation. There will be some observations during due diligence which will be value enhancers. There will be some elements which will be value depleters. So obviously the financial issues will go into a negotiation mode, and what gets factored into finally the price is all the observations that we find from multiple due diligence issues, multiple due diligence items or types that we conduct. Once you have completed the drafting and negotiation, you will do a signing, and that signing may have some process issues, some jurisdictional issues, some locational issues as to where, who is going to sign. I mean, there are multiple parties, particularly multiple jurisdictions. We always face the challenge that how do you see that a transaction is concluded, signed, and now ready to be announced? What is that point in time? So that can be a practical challenge as to whether everybody needs to be really at the same place at the same time, or can people really sign the same document in different locations at different times and then decide and somehow coincide the announcements for public consumption. Post signing, of course, you will then go for all the statutory clearances, third party consents. You will have regulatory approvals if at all required. You will complete the CPs and then you are ready for closing. Usually that we have to into a very structured tracking as to whether all CPs are complete or documents are available, and then you close. Once you close, there are two elements to it. One is all the post-closing actions need also equally sincere tracking, because any slippage at that time can seriously challenge the validity of the transaction. One of the things that can also be challenging in typically asset or a business purchase is the post-transaction adjustments. I'm sure this may have been discussed earlier, I'm not sure. The post-transaction adjustments that happen in the working capital, that is something which can also get into a dispute mode, and that can pose a serious threat. So if you look at broad brush issues, what you can expect as issues in M&A? It can be deal structure, that is what kind of consideration you want to really take for the transaction. Third party consents, whether you will get it, you won't get it, whether there is a time consent expected. In some transactions, you will need also regulatory approvals. In all code-driven processes, there are mandatory notices now to be given to all the regulators, the income tax department, but luckily, actually the law now provides that you can have a flat 30-day timeline within which you are expected to receive the response. If you do not get a response, you are free to go to court and say that sorry, the 30-day period is over. No response is received. Please assume consent. Please assume a positive response from these regulators or departments, and we can proceed with the sanction of the scheme. Maybe we do not have enough time today to talk about the documentary part of the challenges. That is, how do you draft refs, warranties, indemnities, where there should be cap, there should be no limit, what kind of indemnity you can expect from which type of seller. So typically talking about founders and financial investors, we will obviously expect the founders to give all kinds of indemnities for the business. Whereas if you are talking of acquiring shares from a pure financial investor, probably apart from the title and capacity to sell shares, you may not get both the representation, warranty or even indemnity. So the way you negotiate ref, warranties and indemnities can also be tricky. It can also throw a very serious commercial challenge to the whole process. So just to remind us as to what we draft is representations. Representations are cold facts and they are static facts at a point in time. So when I say that there are no litigations or legal proceedings or no sugar or notices, it is a fact as of the date of signing. There will be, of course, the document will provide for that we need to update up to the closing. We need to update that status from time to time to make sure that the purchaser is abreast with whatever is happening with your business between signing and closing. Statutory issues, of course, we will talk about what complexities we can throw. Valuation issues, we will see now a very different challenge as the company that chapter on valuers will get notified. Apart from the institute's vigilance on the professionals, it will also become a statutory offense if you have not followed the valuation process, methodology and reporting correctly. So that's one clearly enhanced risk for all the professionals to say that I'm not going to sign a report just because you want that particular number to be seen on the valuation report. There has to be a logic, there has to be a methodology, there has to be a reason why I will accept that number as a professional, as a valuer. Have I done enough? Have I done performed my duty professionally? Now that is no more going to be tested merely on the principles of disciplinary committee. So it is not merely a misconduct, but it is going to be an offense under Companies Act, and which can obviously throw up serious problems on your personal balance sheet and your firm balance sheet. So you should be aware of that it is no more a matter of mere misconduct. It can now become a statutory offense. There are then issues about whether you can have non-compete, whether you can have non-solicitation, what kind of activities sellers can continue and they cannot continue. A lot will depend on the vision of the seller. So let me give you one of the best examples that we have all witnessed. When Parle sold to Coke, all the soft drink brands, Thumbs Up, Limca, Old Spot, right? What they did not sell was distillery for water and fruity for fruit drinks. The transaction happened in 1994. Today, after 20 years, you realize the vision of the seller that the market for fruit drinks and water has grown much faster than the market for the aerated drinks. So you just see the vision of the person that what am I going to do? Am I really competing in the soft drink business? No, I don't want to be in aerated drink business. But do I want to sell my entirety of the business? The answer is no. What do I want to retain? What do I want to withhold? It can give me a very, very solid business model, a futuristic model. And now you see that as a classic demonstration that what was inherent as a business that the promoters could continue is today a bigger revenue generating model than the inherited trends. So that's a vision of the sale. So it's not merely non-compete on paper. When you talk about what should be excluded from non-compete, it has a lot of futuristic thought process that must go behind your accepting, not accepting a non-compete or non-solicitation. Non-solicitation, I have just a thought that non-solicitation is something which courts are of course upheld. If some element of that human resource that we have worked with all along for many, many years, if that is so very critical to you, please exclude it from your primary transaction upfront rather than facing the allegation that you solicited a purchaser's employee post transaction. Rather than facing that litigious situation, it is better to carve them out upfront so that the non-solicitation will never get into a dispute. Then we have SEBI listing and disclosure obligations, regulations. There are pre-approvals required, there are stakeholders' interests, then there is a decision-making process that we need to follow, and there are disclosures pre and post transaction. So just pausing there, one of the bigger challenges that you see today is the listed companies. Just imagine the listed company is the acquirer and listed company is the target. Both the boards are insiders to the transaction. Both the boards are connected persons. Both the boards are privy to something which is legally called unpublished price sensitive information. With that, the entire team which is now working on this transaction becomes under a closed trading window. And are we talking about only connected persons? No, we are also talking about relatives, firms, companies where they are directly interested. So all of these connected persons suddenly will become it's like a closed door issue where all their transactions will become in suspicion if they do not follow the norms of duty act, if they do not follow the prevention of insider trading. One big issue used to be that when you are a target, when you are being acquired as a listed company, there could be a trigger under the takeover code. There may not be a trigger under the takeover code. It depends on the percentage of shares that are being acquired. But are you permitted as a target to disclose any confidential information? The answer used to be yes, no, maybe it's not so as so bad which is being made out. Today, after the insider trading code has changed in 2015, it is now absolutely black and white that you cannot disclose unpublished price sensitive information to any person unless there is a legitimate purpose or a duty to perform. Which means that during the transaction, without first of all executing a confidentiality agreement, no target can today disclose anything which is not in public domain. Number one. Number two, whether the target should at all offer a due diligence on the target itself, because due diligence will surely go beyond the public domain information. So who is to decide whether such a due diligence to be permitted or not to be permitted? The ball is back in the target's board and mainly the independent directors. Why? Because if there is a transaction governing takeover board, then the offer price which is going to be announced by the acquirer, the target company's board also has to tell its own shareholders whether that price is a fair price. So you have to take two very major governance calls Number one, are you going to permit confidential business information to be disclosed to an acquirer official as a due diligence process? And what is the test, what is the conclusion that the directors need to reach? That offering such a due diligence is in the best interest of the company. Now see the challenges. What are the duties of directors that we talk about under Companies Act and under corporate governance? So decision of the board. So first of all critical elements of M&A transactions. So whether it's a diversification, amalgamation, merger, reconstruction, takeover of company or acquisition of substantial stake in another company, all of these need to have a physical board meeting. These are new elements of section 179 which did not exist under 291, 292, but now has been brought in as additional clauses. And these items of business can be transacted only at a board meeting and they cannot be done through circular resolution. This of course does not mean that you cannot have a meeting through video conferencing, but what it essentially expects you to do is to have a face-to-face conversation, a debate, a deliberation, a participative mode among directors before a decision is made. Now, pausing there again on another governance issue, that what is it that the directors of both the acquirer and